I would like to welcome you to the Pura Center for a new lecture in the spring quarter as part of our lecture series and conferences on the Iranian world. It gives me great pleasure, immense pleasure, to introduce today's speaker, my esteemed colleague, Professor Paulette Saint-Vélian, who's Professor of Linguistics at the University of Paris Cité, Sorbonne Nouvelle, Director of the prestigious research unit Monde Iranien et Indien, supported by the Centre National de Recherche Scientifique, as well as the head of the multi-institutional research cluster Empirical Foundations of Linguistics, housed at the Université Sorbonne Paris Cité. Professor Saint-Vélian's work, which focuses on the description, typology, and formal modeling of New Western Middle Iranian, in particular Persian and Kurdish, is distinguished by its great capaciousness and ability to cross linguistic boundaries to discuss language changes resulting from language contact or induced by internally motivated phenomena. Dr. Saint-Vélian's ability to control simultaneously a multitude of languages among the few Persian, well, actually the many, but I just give few examples, Persian, Kurdish, Armenian, both in the synchrony and diachrony, is most remarkable. Her many publications obviously reflect her wide-ranging research interest, from her seminal work on complex predicates, that is, her Grammaire des prédicats complexes, les constructions non-verbes, to her studies on inflectional periphrasis, and to the Esafe construction in Persian syntax, all attest to the versatility and excellence of her work. Her lecture today is solidly situated within the larger framework of trans-regional linguistic studies and presents the results of a new research project on word order variation in the languages of Western Asia. In particular, it shall focus on language shifts away from the syntactical canonical order of subject-object-verb among the Western Asian languages, Persian, Kurdish, and Eastern Armenian, and seeks to account for these drifts among languages deemed to be typologically similar. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Saint-Vélian. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being here. And of course, my deepest gratitude and thanks to Professor Rahim Shaigan for giving me the opportunity to present this research here. As I wrote in the abstract, this is a very recent project, so what I'm going to present today is contains, let's say, more problems and issues rather than solutions. So I hope that I'm not going to be very boring and not that technical, because linguistics is somehow very technical and boring. So, well, so this is the outline of the talk. First, I'll try to introduce the project of which this research is a part. Then I'll talk about the Western Asia as a linguistic, probably not a linguistic area, but an area interesting for areal studies. Then I'll talk about typology, the typology of word order and word order variation and change in the area. And I'll finish with two case studies, Persian and Eastern Armenian. Unfortunately, I'm going to skip Kurdish because I think that the talk is already too long. So sorry for that. Promise. Okay, so what I'm presenting today is a part of the project called Empirical Foundations of Linguistics. This is a laboratory of excellence with around about 200 researchers, almost 200 PhD students, more than 20 postdoctoral researchers. It was created in 2011 and involves 3 research units. Monde Iranien et Indien, Iranian and Indian worlds is one of those research units, and it is hosted by Université Sorbonne Paris Cité. The project is funded by the ANR, French National Agency for Research, and it includes 6 main research strands and more than 60 work packages. So what the work package called Languages, Dialects and Isoglosses of the Iran, Caucasus, Anatolia, Near East area is one of those work packages. We've already studied, so the project began in 2011, We've already studied a few phenomena like relative clauses and clitic pronouns, and word order variation is a really new topic. So we've started it just, let's say, a few months ago. That's the reason why I insist on the fact that what I'm going to say is much more a research project to come, perhaps, rather than results already. So what are the purposes of this part of the project? Well, the first one is first to provide a detailed cartography of the word order variation in the languages of the area. Well, we know mainly that the languages of the area are, as we say, subject-object-verb order, mainly. But as we're going to see, that's not that straightforward. And until now, we don't have a clear and precise idea of the variation among the languages of the area. Well, another aim is to identify the parameters of variation, things like information structure, length, definiteness, animacy. Well, I'm going to talk about these notions. If you're not linguist, probably some of them are not that familiar for you. The other one is to identify word order changes, be they contact-induced or not. And finally, of course, like all linguistic projects, the ultimate aim is to contribute to the understanding of word order universals, the way languages change, and whether there is a directionality to this change or whether changes are just random. So first, let's begin with Western Asia. What is Western Asia, and why it is worth to study the area as a linguistic area? So it's not a clearly demarcated area, neither politically nor topographically. It can be loosely defined, including Eastern Anatolia, Caucasus, Western Iran, and the Near East. It is of major interest for typology, for areal linguistics, and contact linguistics. So I'll try to explain briefly why is that the area is that interesting. First of all, it's an area of high linguistic diversity and long-standing contact between the languages of the area. There are more than 50 languages. Please don't ask me to enumerate them. I won't be able. And that's also an area of high genetic diversity with languages belonging to 6 language families: Turkic languages, Indo-European languages like Iranian languages, but not only Iranian Indo-European languages, also languages like Armenian, Greek, and Russian, Semitic languages, and Caucasian languages. But there is a controversy whether Caucasian languages form a unique family or 3 families. Anyway, so at least there are 4 language families, at most 6 language families. And apart from this genetic diversity, this is also an area of typological diversity, where we have like inflectional languages like Russian, as well as agglutinative languages like Turkish. We have languages with nominative accusative alignment, but also tense-sensitive alignment and absolutive ergative alignment. So 2 things: linguistic diversity and typologic diversity, and to this we can add also a long-standing contact between languages with various social and political status. So Western Asia is a coherent, though very complex area. It combines different kinds of borders and boundaries between genetic families, between states, and even in a diachronic perspective, empires with various dominant cultural languages like Arabic, Aramic, Persian, Greek, Turkish, and Russian, and also boundaries between languages of different social linguistic status, standards or not, dialects, lingua franca, and, well, other status. And finally, a high rate of bilingualism or even multilingualism. So when all this, here you have the map of the area and the way the languages are distributed. Well, I have to take this, I guess. Well, I try to do without. So, yeah, okay. So the map is not does not give the exact picture, of course, of the languages, because each color corresponds to the dominant language in the area. Of course, it's not the case. As you know, in all of these regions, you have several languages spoken by speakers. So this is just to give you the idea of the variety and diversity of languages of the area. So when these conditions are gathered, that is genetic diversity, typological diversity, and long-standing contact, generally that implies convergence between initially divergent languages. Convergent happens when languages in contact gradually become more like each other, regardless of whether this is due to unilateral influence, reciprocal influence, or both. Or in other words, languages involved in the contact within or outside the language family get closer to each other. Intensive contact and the substantial rate of bilingualism are two important parameters favoring convergence. And areal convergence arises when languages spoken in the same geographical region tend to have features in common, even if they are genealogically unrelated or only distantly related. Areal convergence can also imply the emergence of shared cross-linguistic features that did not exist in any of the languages prior to the contact between them, thus leading to the formation of what we call a linguistic area. So one of the questions under study is first, what is a linguistic area? This is one of the definitions. There are several definitions of what a linguistic area is. I took this one. A linguistic area is a geographical region containing a group of 3 or more languages that share some structural features as a result of contact rather than as a result of accident or inheritance from a common ancestor. Well, those who are familiar with linguistics and areal linguistics know that the example taken always to talk about linguistic area is the example of Balkan languages. Because the languages spoken in that area, despite the fact that they belong to different groups or families, seem to share a few typical features. For instance, there are many Turkish and Greek loanwords in other Balkan languages. Among the more widespread structural Balkanisms are the presence of a high or mid-central vowel harmony also, the partial or total loss of the infinitive, post-post article, redundant object marking, a merger of the dative and genitive cases, a future construction form with the verb want, etc. So the Balkan area was one of the first examples of this idea, this construction, which is linguistic area. Another one is the Indian linguistic area, in fact. So, well, is Western Asia a linguistic area? No, probably not, certainly not. The whole area cannot be considered as a linguistic area, even though there are some centers of convergence or epicenters in the area. For Caucasus, for instance, it has been considered, few linguists have argued that Caucasus can be considered as a linguistic area, but there are also, this is not uncontroversial. Eastern Anatolia has been argued to be a linguistic area by Matras, but Haig rejects this analysis and instead suggests that there are, in fact, 2 epicenters with a kind of buffer zone between these epicenters. Donald Stillo also considers that the area around Arax is a kind of linguistic area, and that the Iranian zone is a kind of buffer zone between the universal typologies of Turkic and Semitic. I'll come back to Stillo's work later. Okay? So at this point, it's useful to introduce what linguistic typology is and what are the notions like variation and change, and is there a difference between them. So I'm going to skip this one. So linguistic typology is it's a manner of classifying languages according to their structural and functional features rather than their genetic origins. So it's quite different. It gives always quite different results from the genetic classification. That is, that languages belonging to the same genetic family may display different typological properties. But apart from classifying languages, there are also linguistic typology or language typology tries also to find to discover whether there are universal tendencies in the languages of the world, despite their genetic diversity. And if yes, what is the explanation for these universals? And are there implicational relations between specific properties? Or in other words, the way a specific set of typological properties are displayed in a language may imply other properties. So a correlation between different properties. So doing this, of course, our ultimate purpose is, as says Dreyer, from linguistic preferences to find insight to possible innate specifications, processing preferences, communicative needs, and in other words, human cognition. So what is the nature of linguistic knowledge? What is the nature of language and language change? So one of the first studies in language typology was carried on by Joseph Greenberg, who is considered as the father of linguistic typology. And in his seminal work called Some Universals of Grammar with Particular Reference to the Order of Meaningful Elements, he introduced what nowadays we call word order language universals. So this is one of the ways of classifying the languages of the world. You classify them with respect to their word order, their canonical word order. The way we classify them is to take three elements of the sentence: the subject, the object, the verb. So this is a typical transitive sentence in a declarative main clause, and we look at the order. So, for instance, in English, the woman chased the man. We'll say that English is an SVO language because the subject comes first, then the verb, and then the object. So according to this classification, a priori, we have 6 possibilities of combinations in the languages of the world: SOV, SVO, VSO, OSV, OVS, and VOS. Okay? Mathematically speaking, we have all these possibilities. Okay? So the first thing to do is to identify what we call the canonical or the basic word order in a language. For some languages, it's easy, like English, French. These are SVO languages. You're not going to spend not even 3 minutes in order to discover that French is an SVO language. But for many other languages, it's much more difficult. And even nowadays, go ask, for instance, German linguists whether German is an verb second language or verb final language. Okay, there is also debate on that. There is still debate on that. So how is the canonical word order identified? Well, either it is the only possible order, okay, that's simple, or it is the most frequent one when there are variations in the order. Note that there can also be languages with free word order. This is quite rare. I don't even know whether that exists, but, well, let's say that there are a few languages which display free word order. And in some cases, there are various orders but are which are grammatically conditioned. Like in German, in the main clause, you don't have the same order than in a subordinate clause. So the initial work of Greenberg included only 30 languages. Well, since that seminal work, several studies have been carried on word order. The latest one, to which I'm going to refer, is done by Hammerstrom, and he has studied more than 5,000 languages to establish these word order universals. And guess what? Even though there are 6 possibilities a priori, when you look at the languages, you don't obtain all possibilities realized at the same rate. So among the languages of the world, 43% are SVO, so the majority of the languages of the world. Then comes SVO order, 40%, and you have examples of languages there. So SOV languages like Iranian languages, Indian languages, Latin, Japanese, Korean, Quechua. So as you see there, these are languages all over the world. So there is no link between a priori a region, a geographic region, and a word order. But after SOV, we have SVO, most European languages, but also Chinese, for instance, Swahili, Xhosa. Then comes VSO, and you see that the rate goes really down to 10%. That's not bad. Semitic languages, but also Irish and Welsh, Tuareg Berber, Hawaiian, words like that. And then VOS, no dom is no dominant order, so free word order. OVS and OSV are almost, let's say, almost inexistent for the last one, for instance. So, as you notice, well, the first question, to which I'm not going to answer today, of course, is why are these 2 orders prevalent and not the other ones? But there are several explanations for that, but this is not the topic of my talk today. Okay, and if we have a look at the way this word orders are spread on the world. The maps come from Wahl's Word Atlas of Language Structures, done by Max Planck University, Leipzig. And as you see, the area I'm interested in. So SOV is dominant, but it becomes even more dominant if we remove family bias. What I mean by that if you take only one language from each family, each branch or group, then the ratio of SOV goes even upper, okay? So 46%, and SVO goes to 60% only, okay? So why? Because some large families are responsible for the proliferation of SVO. So SOV is indeed the predominant word order, okay? And in the area we are interested in, Eurasia, this is the second column, I guess, this one. So that's what word order typology is, and as I told you, in Western Asia, we're going to deal with mainly SOV languages, as we're going to see. Okay? Now, what is word order variation? Okay? Now, the canonical word order is not the only attested or possible word order in a language. And most languages display word order variation in various syntactic domains. So if you know, for instance, Russian, sorry, it's transcribed, it's not the Russian, not the Cyrillic alphabet. Well, Russian is considered to be an SVO language, but all the other orders are possible. So none of these sentences are ungrammatical in Russian. Okay? SOV, OVS, okay? But the fact that you may have variation does not mean that these sentences are used in the same way. So in other words, go back, all these sentences are synonymous truth conditionally. Okay, so if the first one is true, the second one is true too, and the third one is true too, and so on. But they are not equivalent discourse-wise or with respect to what we call information structure. So one of the factors of variation in the languages with word order variation is what we call information structure or information packaging. And we use notions like topic, theme, comment, rhyme, focus to structure a sentence, but mainly the idea is what you're talking about and what you say about this thing. So what is new information, what is old information, and things like that. So according to that, you're going to order things differently. And one of the word order universals is that generally, given information, old information comes before new information. Generally, topic becomes before comment. That's why in most languages of the world, the subjects comes before other grammatical elements. So this is one of the factors of variation, and it is a very relevant factor of variation in Western Asian languages, in SOV languages. So, for instance, if we take the colloquial Persian, well, the canonical word order would be Maryam Golduna Shekast. Okay? But we can also say Golduna Maryam Shekast, Shekast Golduna Maryam, Shekast Maryam Golduna. But we're not going to use these sentences in the same contexts. So, for instance, the first sentence can be an answer to the question, what happened? Chi shod? Hichi Maryam Golduna Shekast. This is what we call an all-focus sentence. So the whole information is a new information, and it can be the answer to the question, what happened? It can also be the answer to the question, what did Maryam do? Maryam chikar kard? Hichi Maryam Golduna Shekast. But the second one, for instance, Golduna Maryam Shekast, cannot be an answer to the question, what happened? Okay? Neither the third one. Chi shod? Shekast Golduna Maryam. Okay, that seems odd, weird. Okay, so even though in Persian is considered to be an SOV language, all these variations are a priori possible, but they correspond to different possibilities of information packaging. So this is a part of what we are doing in the project. So the way information is structured in SOV languages, the universal thing is generally considered to be in SOV languages, there is a preverbal focus position just before the verb. And post-verbal elements cannot be focal. So no new information after the verb. Okay, so this is one of the things we try to verify and to see whether it is in fact the case that there are no focal objects, neither subjects in Persian after the verb. So all elements that go after the verb are supposed to be backgrounded or given information. Okay. The other factor of variation, so information packaging is one factor of variation. The other one, well known, is what we call length or complexity or weight. The English translation is the law of increasing or growing constituents. It was formulated by a German linguist, and well, the rough translation is of two constituents of different sizes. The larger one follows the smaller one. Okay, so in English it is called the principle of end weight. Like, we take too many dubious idealizations for granted, or we take for granted too many dubious idealizations. So it has been claimed that in all the languages of the world, short before long is a preference. So we put first short elements and then longer elements. Here again, studying SOV languages shows that, in fact, in SOV languages, we have the reverse preference, long before short. And studying Persian, I'll show you the quantitative study on Persian. In fact, Persian and Japanese confirm the reverse preference long before short, which is another question, why? Why SOV languages and SVO languages are like mirror images of each other. And there are also other factors like definiteness. In Persian, it is very important to determine the word order, animacy, and others. So, what are hypotheses? That universal cross-linguistic functional factors exist, which are at work to determine word order preferences in languages, and that the interaction between these various factors is, if we want to, I mean, speakers do not choose an order by randomly. Okay, there are preferences, and these preferences can be calculated, can be modeled, if we have an efficient model to calculate the interaction between these parameters. This is what we have done already for Persian. I'll talk about you. So this is what I talked about is word order variation. So in synchrony, in a language, in most languages, you can find variation in word order, even in strict languages. Like in English, you can say, chocolate I hate. Okay, so this is a possibility to put the direct object in the topical position and to organize your sentence differently. Okay, so, but word order changes also. I mean, languages change, everything changes, and word order is also one of the properties that change. It changes, word order change is rare, quite rare, because that's one of the most stable parts of a language, syntax of a language, but it changes. One of the most known, well-known and studied cases is the shift from Latin to Romance languages. Well, Latin is said to be SOV. I'm not a Latinist, so be kind, please. I'm just quoting people, okay? So while all Romance languages are SVO, with no exception to my knowledge. And, well, that's a quotation from Cantillon. I pronounce it in French, sorry. So, if composition allows, it is much better to end with a verb, for the force of language is in verbs. Okay? And that's a sentence from Virgile illustrating this order. So, SOV. But it is well known that Latin is also a free word order language. L'ordre des mots en latin est libre, mais il n'est pas indifférent. So what it says is that there is free word order, but it's not indifferent, so you cannot do anything. Well, when we shift from Latin to Romance languages, there are two things happening. First, the case system. There is a decay of the case system, and all subsequent Romance languages use either fewer cases or no case at all. For instance, in French, there is no case. And the other change is the word order in simple transitive sentences changed from OV to SVO. So this, again, is not my work. So it is it's from Benz and Christiansen. So they use two complete sets of counts from the classical period and the later Pregnatio from Pinkster, and they obtain this result. So if you add all orders where the object comes before the verb, it's the majority of the cases. Okay, so one can say that Latin is verb final. So object comes, in the majority of cases, in usage, the object comes before the verb. Well, so, but why, one of the questions is why all these languages shifted from SOV to SVO. There are many explanations. I cannot present all of them, but people who work on language evolution have found something very interesting in the evolution of word order. Although SOV is more frequent in the languages of the world, when change happens, it is generally toward SVO. So there is a directionality in the change, okay? And very few languages shift from SVO to SOV, and when it happens, it is probably and exclusively contact, okay? But generally, if there is a shift, it is from SOV to SVO. So languages almost never seem to change into SVO, and instead there even seems to be a shift away from the word order. Now, there are all this work on that. So there is a general bias for SVO word orders in the world. And apart from that, SVO languages seems to be relatively stable, while SOV languages are less stable, have more variation. Another thing is that in SVO languages, word order is more grammaticalized, is more strict, and less variation is possible. While in SOV languages, there are more variations, and the order is not that stable. So, what are the explanations? Of course, one is contact, okay? The other one, which I'm not going to examine, is what interests linguists is cognition, is the fact that probably processing and understanding SVO order is easier than SOV. I'm not going to enter the discussion because it's very complex and very controversial, but that's probably one of the ways to explain the change. So, the other tricky thing is that although SOV is dominant, when we take this, another picture, SOV is dominant, but SVO has more speakers. So, big languages, languages with many speakers are SVO, okay? So you have the three most spoken languages in the world, Chinese, Spanish, and English, are SVO, okay? So SVO word order is predominant. However, if we look at the number of speakers that each language has, then a different picture emerges. And I show the figure. It was from the work I quoted too. So if we add the number of speakers of these languages, we have the difference between SOV and SVO. Okay, so that was the introduction to word order. So let's come to our, shift to our area. So Western Asia is dominantly SOV, but not, the interesting thing is that its languages of the area are SOV, but generally they are not typically SOV. What does that mean? Well, Iranian, Turkic, and Caucasian languages are SOV, Semitic languages are VSO, Armenian is SOV, Russian and Greek are SVO. However, Iranian languages do not fully conform to the typological properties of SOV languages. In other words, there are aberrant, abnormal, weird SOV languages, okay? Why? Because when we're speaking about word order, we're not only speaking about the word order at the clause level, but about a series of implications which come with that. For instance, in SVO languages, we expect to have prepositions, like in English. To marry, from, London, things like that. In SOV languages, we expect to have postpositions. Roughly speaking, SOV languages are supposed to be head final, so you put the preposition, the adposition at the end, which is a postposition. If you have a possessor and a possessed, you are going to put the possessed at the end. If you have like a subordinate clause, you're going to put the conjunction at the end, and things like that. So the if a language is a good SOV language, it will confirm all these properties. And there are languages like that. That's the case of Japanese, for instance, okay, which is a very good SOV language, not like Iranian languages. In SVO languages, you expect to have prepositions, modifiers follow the noun, complement clauses follow the verb, conjunctions precede the subordinate clause, and so on. So Japanese is a perfect SOV language. French is an almost perfect SVO language, but French are never perfect, in fact, so they are almost perfect. But English is also a quite good SVO language, but not totally always. Well, these are examples from Japanese, okay, which show why we say that Japanese is a perfect SOV language. So, as you see, the verb is in the final position, and for each participant in the sentence, like the subject, you have the case marker or the postposition after it. The interesting thing is the last sentence. I took these examples from Edward Kennan's, one of Ed Kennan's handouts for a class. So the last example is very interesting. You see that comes after the subordinate clause, okay, and not before it. So this is a typically SOV language, okay? All heads are at the end, okay? Everything precedes. Okay? Well, no. In Western Asia, there are good examples of SOV languages and good examples of SVO languages. Turkish, for instance, is a very good SOV language. Arabic is a very good SVO language. And as this is from Donald Stillo, as you see, these languages are each the mirror image of the other one, okay? So this is what we expect when we have SOV versus SVO, okay? But the thing is that, unfortunately, this is not the perfect case. The perfect case does not happen always. So what happens in the area? Well, as Donald Stillo says, word order implication universals are tendencies. They can predict the syntactic patternings of the word language in almost 30% of cases. However, many languages have a mixed behavior, and Iranian languages, for instance, or Armenian, have this mixed behavior. So let's switch to Persian and see what happens in Persian and why. So Persian is an excellent example of a SOV mixed word order. Why? Because complement clauses follow the verb, which is not expected in an SOV language. Conjunctions precede the subordinate clause, ke, goftam ke, something. The Persian does not have postpositions unless you consider the ra, the differential object marker, as a postposition, which is not uncontroversial. Modifiers follow the noun. Okay? Ketabe, kuchake, I don't know what, and the possessor follows the possessed. So, in all these cases, Persian behaves rather like a SVO language, not an SOV language. Okay. Well, I'm not going to comment the example because most of you probably know Persian. So, well, this isn't the illustration of the fact that we have a mixed configuration, in fact. Well, in a very interesting paper, Donald Stillo takes into account this data and puts forward several claims. I'll take two of them. The first one is that languages that do not meet the expectations of implicational universals are often found between two languages, groups of languages, or language areas that are more or less opposite to each other. That is, a language of mixed typology often serves as a transition zone between a group of typically VO languages and a group of typically OV languages. Okay? Iranian languages, in fact, act as a transition or buffer zone that represents a hybridization of two opposite patterns of their neighbors in each direction. Okay? Between Semitic languages, which are VSO, and Turkic languages, which are strictly SOV. So according to Stilo, the fact that Iranian languages behave in this bizarre way is that, in fact, they are a kind of transition zone between these two kinds of languages. When those patterns that are aberrant, according to universal predictions, are examined from the areal standpoint, we find a higher level of consistency of the aberrant pattern within the areal dimension. While predictability is not absolute, we find relatively few counterexamples, for instance, purely OV or VO examples in the middle of a transition or buffer zone. So this is Donald Stilo's claim to explain what happens in Iranian languages. Well, I'm not going to read all his claims, but I'm not really convinced with this explanation for several reasons. And this is the beginning of this project I'm talking about. So I'll take two case studies, Persian and Eastern Armenian. And my knowledge in historical linguistics is almost inexistent. So please be forgiving and kind. I've asked my colleagues, Agnes Korn particularly, to help me for this part, and Thomas Hugel. So if you have different ideas, knowledge, please let me know, because I'm really interested in those facts. So Old Persian is generally considered to be canonically SOV2, but obviously their variations are possible and even frequent. That is from Kent. The basic word order is verb final. SOV preverbs are always adverb, often clause initial. The indirect object usually follows the direct object. The second position in the clause is reserved for enclitics. Okay, forget enclitics. These are Wackernagel second position clitics. We forget about them. Well, it seems that Middle Persian displays almost the same situation. So this is from Thomas Hugel's PhD thesis. So what's interesting for me is that in Middle Persian, Middle Iranian, we've already this tense sensitive alignment, which is in the past transitive construction, clitics become sort of agreement markers. And so counting the order is not easy, and perhaps it's not even relevant, because the fact that we have a sort of ergative type alignment somehow makes word order difficult to identify. Okay, so what happens in Middle Persian is that, okay, there are SOV and SVO, but there is also this strange thing, which is the use of Wackernagel clitics to realize subject-verb agreement. So the presence of this clitics is something relevant which is totally ignored by Donald Stilo. And I think that this is probably one of the reasons that Persian does not switch to SVO, despite the fact that Old Iranian, Old Persian, and Middle Persian have both SOV and SVO. Okay? So what happens in modern New Persian is But morphological case marking disappears. It's already almost the case in Middle Persian. But what happens is that differential object marking emerges. So there is an enclitic ra which functions almost as a case marker. So what happens is, okay, you have SOV and SVO in Middle Iranian. Case disappears. This is also the case in Romance languages. When case disappears and when you have variation SOV, SVO, the tendency is to go to SVO. But in Middle Iranian languages, contrary to European languages, there is this ergative thing, okay, which interacts with word order and probably doesn't favor the switch to SVO. And later Persian creates this differential object marking, which is a good way of maintaining SOV because there is no ambiguity. You have the subject, you have the object which is marked when it is human, and then the verb. So in written Persian, nowadays, in fact, what has happened in written Persian is that SVO has become the grammaticalized dominant order. So in written Persian, you almost don't find things after the verb. So written Persian is mainly SOV. In spoken Persian, there are post-verbal elements, but they are, as I said, backgrounded, which was not the case probably, but which was not the case in Middle Persian. Okay, so for modern Persian, there has been an extensive quantitative and corpus-based study by Pegah Faghiri. It was her PhD thesis. It was a corpus-based. The corpus was the Bijan Khan corpus. I don't know whether you're familiar with that corpus. It has been elaborated by the researchers of the University of Tehran. And it's a collection of newspapers, novels, various kinds of texts. The interest is that it contains almost 3 million manually tagged words. So you can do quantitative work on that. And Pegah has also carried on a series of experiments with more than 3 participants, anonymous participants online, with experimental protocol from cognitive psychology. So what she's shown in her work is that, for instance, one very frequent idea about Persian was that in ditransitive sentences, the canonical order, when we have ra, is direct object, indirect object, like ketab ra be Maryam dadam. But if the object is unmarked, then we have be Maryam yek ketab dadam or be Maryam ketab dadam. Well, her study, so the picture was supposed to be the one on the left. Okay, so grouping bare objects, indefinite objects, and bare modified objects together, and then raw marked objects on the other side. What she has shown is that the picture is in fact much more complex, and that's in fact what happens is here. Okay? So the distribution is like that in fact. So the more definite the object, the more it has tendency to be separated from the verb. So Persian is an SOV language, but in the preverbal domain, definiteness plays a role in ordering things. And again, it confirms the general tendency definite before indefinite. But it's not a binary thing. It's a kind of degree of definiteness. This is quite rare. It hasn't, I have no example of another language which works exactly like that, which is quite interesting. So, conclusions for Persian. Although both SOV and SVO orders were attested in Middle Persian, SOV order is grammaticalized in modern Neo Persian. So, one cannot say that Persian has free word order, or, so I repeat, post-verbal domain is not a focal domain. So it is as if it doesn't exist in declarative sentences. The loss of morphological case marking has not favored the grammaticalization of the SVO order. Possible explanation, but, well, to work out, is the existence probably of an ergative-like alignment or tense-sensitive alignment. And the emergence of differential object marking could be an explanation to the preservation or reinforcement of the SOV order. So contrary to Stillo, I don't think that the aberrant properties of Persian are a result of contact with Turkish. I mean, the fact that it's a transition zone between Turkish and Semitic languages. Now, the other interesting case is, so Persian goes to SOV, becomes almost a kind of rigid SOV language, while in its other domains, it's rather SVO-like, like prepositions, relative clauses after the noun, things like that. While modern Armenian does almost the reverse thing, okay? So, modern Eastern Armenian. Classical Armenian is is claimed to be SVO. Okay? When shifting from classical Armenian to modern Armenian, there is a shift from SVO to SEOV, which is quite rare, but which is explained by contact, because Armenian has been in very intensive contact with Turkic languages, Persian. Both of them are highly SOV. And from doubling modifiers from prepositions to postpositions, so modern Armenian has rather postpositions and few prepositions, and from doubling modifiers to exclusively pre-post modifiers. So, in fact, it is as if Armenian has evolved closer to the typical SOV languages than Persian, okay, historically. So the shift seems to be rather consistent, okay? But if we look the grammars of modern or Eastern Armenian, they say basically SOV, all these grammarians, non-rigid SOV, SOV. Okay, so there is a consensus that modern Armenian is SOV, okay? But, so here are some examples, okay, which in fact illustrate the fact that Armenian is SOV. I'm not going to read them. Postpositions. Well, however, like Persian, subordinate clauses come after the verb, and relative clauses go after the noun too, and conjunctions before the subordinate clause. So Armenian is somehow not a perfect SOV language, but it is closer to perfection than modern Persian. Okay? However, a few years ago when I went to Armenia for the first time, I was absolutely surprised by the high rate of SVO sentences. And my Iranian Armenian was very SOV. Okay? And so I was wondering whether it was just an impression or whether it is really the fact that modern Eastern Armenian is in fact switching back to SVO again. So we began this, which is very recent work on word order in Armenian. Fortunately for us, there is an Eastern Armenian corpus. It is excellent. It has been done by the researchers at the State University of Moscow, namely Professor Plungian. So you can, it's freely available, and you can do everything with this corpus. It's really great. It's annotated for parts of speech and everything. So our first result. So what we did was to take just two verbs to begin with, to buy and to meet, okay, two prototypical transitive verbs. And we extracted all sentences with the aorist tense. I excluded composed periphrastic tenses because in Armenian the auxiliary is eclectic, which is not at the same place, so it's complicated. So I took only simple verbs. And and then I extracted all these sentences and I annotated them manually. So you don't see, but it's not important. And this was the result of the calculation. So SVOV is only 39%, SVO is 66% for to buy. Okay? It's almost surprising, very surprising. So at this stage, what I had chosen was, I had extracted only texts from press. So the question was whether I can find the same thing in fiction, novels, short stories, etc. So we did the same thing with fiction texts, and the result was quite similar. Okay? I have it here. So there are two verbs: to meet. Meet journal is the first one. Buy. Meet journal. Meet fiction, and we get almost the same results for buy and for meet. So that was the first corpus study. We're going to, of course, to pursue. This is really a very rudimentary study. So this is not a real quantitative study, let's say. Okay, that was just to have a clue whether SVO is indeed the most frequent order. It seems to be the case, at least in written Armenian. Okay. Then we did also an experimental-based study. Well, this is the way it is done. That psychologists do this, those who work on cognition and cognitive psychology. So there is an online design of experiment. You ask participants to go and to answer, to make sentences. Okay, for instance, this one is, I missed the part of the movie, what happened? Filmi այդ մասը չտեսա, ինչ պատահեց. And then you give them the choice to order these four words. One of them is wrong. Okay, so they must take the three other words and make a sentence. So again, the result of the study was something like that. So SOV, this time SOV is more important, 54%, SVO 35%, but what we did here was that the direct objects were mainly very short and indefinite. So the fact is, are we going to have the same answers if we have definite objects and longer objects or not? Probably it is not going to be the case. But already, this is a very interesting result if we compare this to Persian, because for Persian, that's almost, as I told you, the SVO order is almost inexistent in written Persian. Okay, you see there. Okay, so these are results from Pegafari's thesis. Okay, even not 1%. So now, time to conclude. Sorry, it was quite long. So my interim conclusions. Although dominantly SOV, languages of Western Asia display various manners of being SOV. The fact that Iranian languages have not shifted to the SVO word order, contrary to Western Indo-European languages, is likely to result from various factors. Contact, perhaps, as Stilo suggests, but other specificities of these languages, namely tense-sensitive or ergative alignment. Eastern Armenian, on the other hand, is probably shifting to SVO. This can be the result of a contact with Russian, and that's why probably in press genre texts, SVO is more frequent than in fiction, for instance. For oral, I haven't studied spoken Armenian. And the aberrant or mixed SOV order of Iranian languages and Armenian invite us to adopt a new perspective on word order correlations and implications. Thank you for your attention.